We've all long realized that China is a high-tech and advanced country. The launch of another ambitious megaproject here almost feels like no big deal to us anymore. China builds the longest bridges, its cities are home to towering skyscrapers, and bullet trains zip across endless landscapes. It seems this country always has a new way to show the world they think far ahead into the future. And here they go again, pulling off a massive project, a gigantic water transfer system. At first glance, it doesn't sound all that impressive since pipes and pumps aren't exactly groundbreaking these days. But as always, China has taken it to the next level. They're planning to carry water hundreds of miles along man-made rivers that practically flow over the mountains. You don't have to be an expert to see it, the country has two parts that are totally different from each other. The first part is the southern one. Here the climate is mild and subtropical, winters are short, and the scenery stays gorgeous all year round. This kind of climate is a dream come true for a farmer or just someone who enjoys warm weather. But the biggest perk of this part of the country is having water around. There's really a ton of it here, all thanks to the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. The Huanghe, or Yellow River, is one of the longest rivers in the world, stretching nearly 3,400 miles. It supplies water to about 12% of the country's population, irrigates 17% of its farmland, and provides for over 50 cities. This river is the true heart of China's millennia-old history, which is why it's often called the cradle of Chinese civilization. The waters of the Yellow River have given life not just to people but to a thriving aquaculture. For instance, pond after pond in the Xinjiang area is used to farm a local species of carp, and not far from Bansan they raise Chinese soft-shell turtles, a real treat for foodies. However, the real wonder unfolded just a bit farther south, off the banks of the Yangtze River, which could easily outshine the Yellow River's accomplishments. Since it's not only the longest and most water-rich river in China but all of Eurasia, it ranks third worldwide for water volume and fourth for length, stretching an impressive 3,915 miles. When the Chinese came to these lands from the Huanghe Valley, they faced a new reality. The climate was even milder than where they'd been before, with plenty of rain, almost no droughts, and no frosts. This river became a true paradise for farmers. A whole new way of farming sprang up here, mostly revolving around growing rice. To give you an idea of just how rich the so-called southern region is, there are times when this precious resource gets so abundant it causes people to suffer. Typhoons and East Asian monsoons frequently hit these areas, leaving behind catastrophic flooding. On top of that, the rivers themselves regularly spill over their banks. The Yellow River carries so much silt and wood that over the years it creates a riverbed that towers several feet above the surrounding lands. This could have been an advantage, but it quickly turns into a nightmare when nature gets out of hand. Any overflow or a breach in the dam leads to devastating floods. And we're not just talking about water here. Imagine a flow of liquid mud crushing everything in its path, leaving no chance for homes, crops, or people. And let's not even talk about the massive floods caused by the Yangtze, which, as we've learned, is much more powerful than the Yellow River. They also tried to tackle the problem with well-designed dam systems, but after these projects were implemented, the floods didn't subside. In the end, the green region may seem like paradise, but at times it turns into a place where simply being there is downright dangerous to life. True, all this excess water in the south, which sometimes becomes critical, still doesn't make the region less livable than the northern part. The situation there is totally different. Long, cold, and dry winters with temperatures that constantly drop below 32 degrees Fahrenheit make life harsh. And if you think that in the summer everything's the other way around, well yes, but not in a better way. It's hot, humid, and sometimes exhaustingly stuffy here in summer. The transitional periods of spring and autumn, when you can still live more or less comfortably, pass by in the blink of an eye. The ecology of northern China may be simple, but it's incredibly vulnerable to droughts, which occur here regularly. You can clearly see the climate difference between parts of China on a map. The southern part is red, or close to this color. The average temperature throughout the year is above 50 to 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, the northern part has an average yearly temperature close to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Due to a combination of all sorts of factors, there's an enormous amount of sand in the north. For example, it's in this part of the country that you'll find the impassable Taklamakan, a harsh desert with shifting sands, and by the way, it's the largest of its kind. Don't forget about the Gobi, one of the largest deserts in the world, which is constantly expanding. For centuries, Mongolian herders have roamed these harsh steppes to graze their cattle on the tough, scrubby grasses that somehow survive in this unforgiving land. However, the Chinese somehow managed to survive here too. But if you thought that the whole northern part of China is covered in sand, think again. There are also mountain ranges that take up just as much space, and the land there is definitely not what you'd call friendly. As you'd expect, northern China faces the problem not typical for the south, a lack of water. The demand for water here far exceeds its supply. First of all, it's because there's not much rainfall in the northern part. It's clear that the southern part gets way more rain. The area looks darker on maps. The rest of China struggles with this, and this isn't a matter for any specific month. This situation is typical throughout the whole year on average. And now we'll suddenly move to the capital of China, Beijing. Why? The thing is, the city suffers from a water shortage just like a village in Africa. For a long time, Beijing got its water from aquifers, but at a certain point, due to dry periods, the underground reserves just stopped replenishing. On top of that, they were also heavily polluted due to rapid industrialization. Eventually there came a time when there was less than 26,400 gallons of water per capita within the city's administrative borders. This was 1/12 of the national average, 1/80th of the global average, and far below the internationally recognized level. A severe water shortage begins when there are less than 449,000 gallons per capita. In short, Beijing is a clear example of how serious the water problems are in northern China. Of course, the water crisis in northern China cost the country a lot. The economy loses about $35 billion every year because of water shortages. That's 2.5 times more than the average losses from flooding. It may seem like the problem is too difficult to solve radically, and coming up with something that would really change the situation is hard. The way things are, some places have conditions that allow people to live comfortably and use enough water, while others have to survive and constantly save every drop of this precious resource. However, don't forget that we're talking about a country of grand projects that constantly amaze the world. So at some point China wondered, what if the South just shared water with the North and balanced things out? In fact, people started thinking about it long before the current water crisis. When the Communist Party came to power in 1949, China entered a new era of industrial growth and centralized planning. And that's when one of the main issues, the huge gap in access to water between the south and the north of the country, became obvious and almost top priority. It was during this period, in 1952, that Mao Zedong proposed an idea that could change the situation in the country. He said, "There's plenty of water in the south, not much water in the north. If at all possible, borrowing some water would be good." These words became the starting point for an ambitious project to transfer water from the south to the north. But Mao didn't live to see his plans come true. Though they started thinking about the project almost immediately, it was in development for a full 50 years and only existed on paper. The calculations took longer than expected. Until December 1979, the Ministry of Water Resources in China didn't even have project planning offices. Only by the 1990s, with the backing of some high-ranking officials, did the project finally come close to being realized. And so, in December 2002, they began building the Grand System. The project's goal was to pump an incredible 11.7 trillion gallons of fresh water every year to areas with shortages using 3 canals. These canals were supposed to stretch for thousands of miles, connecting the Yangtze and the Yellow River, as well as the Hai and Huai rivers. The names? Well, they didn't bother coming up with anything fancy. There's the Eastern, Central, and Western Canal. The Eastern Canal project was meant to divert part of the flow of the Yangtze River, whose average annual flow at the mouth reaches about 253 trillion gallons, and even in the driest years maintains a volume of no less than 158 trillion gallons. The goal of the project was to direct 2.4 trillion gallons per year to the north, but later the figure grew to 4 trillion gallons, which perhaps still isn't a huge loss for the south. The main intake point of the central route was located near Xianggu, where a powerful pumping station with a capacity of 14,000 cubic feet per second was already built in the 1980s. Construction of the Eastern Canal started on December 27, 2002, and by 2014 the first water deliveries had reached Shandong province. The total length of the route was an impressive 76 miles, with water flowing along the Grand Canal into reservoirs near Tianjin. The key element of this grand project was the tunnel crossing under the Yellow River in Shandong province. At a depth of 230 feet below the riverbed, two horizontal tunnels with a diameter of 30 feet were laid, allowing the water to overcome such natural obstacles. Due to the terrain features of the Yi Plain and the North China Plain, 23 pumping stations with a total capacity of 454 megawatts are used to carry water to the Yellow River. From there, the flow moves north through aqueducts. The entire system was completed by 2017, and now Tianjin receives 264 billion gallons of water every year. Now let's move on to the most important part, the Central Route, also known as the Grand Aqueduct. It's located right next to the eastern one. This massive waterway starts at a reservoir on the Han River, a tributary of the Yangtze, and stretches all the way to Beijing. One of the main tasks here was to raise the height of the Danjiangkou Dam, which, even before the Northern Water Transfer Project, was already a huge engineering marvel. But to fully tame the element, they raised the waterway even higher, from 531 to 581 feet. This move allowed the water level in the reservoir to reach 558 feet, ensuring the natural flow of water down the canal. And this is probably the most impressive part, the water flows solely under the force of gravity. No pumping stations were needed. But even here there were some difficulties, as this route crosses the North China Plain. So two tunnels were built under the Yellow River. Construction of the Central Route started a little later, in 2004, and its northern section, 191 miles long, was completed in 2008. In 2014, all work on the route was completed, and its final length reached 785 miles. Initially, the Central Path supplied 2.5 trillion gallons of water per year, but now it delivers 3.4 trillion gallons of this liquid resource to the areas in need. One of the main problems became the decrease in the river flow below the Danjiangkou Dam, which diverts about a third of the water from the route. To solve this issue, the Yinjiang-Bohan Tunnel project was announced in July 2022. It'll connect China's main Three Gorges Reservoir to the Han River, then connect to an open canal running north to Beijing. In total, the project will span 870 miles and cost $8.9 billion, with most of it remaining underground about 6 miles deep. This project will likely use the latest tunnel boring equipment, since the intense pressure 6 miles below the surface will cause the progress to slow down significantly. But even with that equipment, the project will take about 10 years to complete. The tunnel is expected to be finished only by 2032. And finally, we've reached the Western Route, which is supposed to be located much farther than the eastern and central ones. This route is the biggest challenge for the Chinese builders, and it comes with so many difficulties that the Chinese didn't face while building the other two routes and probably won't face when expanding them. The thing is, the project of the Western Route is aimed at connecting the Yangtze and Yellow River through the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau, the highest in the world, which on maps of China usually looks like a big brown blotch. The plateau covers an area of about 965,000 square miles, which is about a quarter of the territory of mainland China. The average altitude is nearly 3 miles above sea level, which is why this region is called the roof of the world and Earth's third pole. And it's through these mountain ranges that China plans to transfer 4.5 trillion gallons of water every year. To give you an idea of the scale, this is equal to the amount of water in 7 million Olympic swimming pools. However, they haven't even started to build the route yet. The process turned out to be so complicated that it took 7 decades of research and planning. Can you imagine how much work it's going to take to lay down a proper path for the water through the highlands? It's probably going to be something like that, of course, just on a larger scale. This will be a winding canal that curves around mountains and stretches for hundreds of miles. But the Chinese know how to make tunnels, so they could just go straight through. The only thing is it would mean even more work. Actually, there are a lot of options, but they're all really hard to pull off. So the Chinese only reached a preliminary consensus in 2023 about starting the project. It's incredible, but the first study of the route began back in 1952, the same year the idea for the whole project was presented by the Chinese leader. As part of the first phase of the program, the parties agreed to transfer 1 trillion gallons of water. As an alternative to the western route, the Tianhe project was proposed in 2015. It's the largest weather modification system in the world, based on artificial rainmaking using cloud seeding. The project can generate 1.3 to 2.6 trillion gallons of rainfall every year over northern China. It's unclear if Tianhe will actually replace the western route, but it's safe to say that the project is already included in China's 13th five-year plan. There were other proposals as well. In the 1990s, a water resources expert suggested a canal that would involve building a dam in Tibet to redirect 53 trillion gallons of water from Sichuan to Beijing and Tianjin. However, this project was later deemed technically unfeasible. Do you think that the alternatives to the western route end here? Not at all. Something like this can bring in so much water that many researchers and professors felt it was their duty to suggest their own ideas. In 2017, it was proposed to annually divert 6.16 trillion gallons of water from the transboundary rivers in the Shangri-La Tibet Plateau, including the upper reaches of the Brahmaputra or Yalang Zangpo, the Mekong, and the Salween, and send it to northwest China. The plan was to create more than 50,000 square miles of arable land in Xinjiang and 58,000 square miles of a green belt. But like many other proposals, this plan raised serious doubts among scientists and geographers. But let's get back to the whole water transfer project. How much did it cost? In 2008, the construction expenses for just the eastern and central routes were estimated at $37.44 billion. The government allocated only $53.878 billion at the time, which was less than a quarter of the total cost. This included $26 billion from the central government and special accounts, $8 billion from local authorities, and nearly $20 billion in loans. But the project's cost just kept growing. By 2014, over $79 billion had been spent on it, making it one of the most ambitious and expensive engineering projects in human history. And the work still wasn't finished. To put it in perspective, the total cost of the International Space Station was about $150 billion. So the water transfer project has already cost just over half of what helps all of humanity move forward. But when it comes to China, it was worth it. The mega project has already helped over 185 million people in 45 major and medium-sized cities along the routes, and its reach continues to grow. Due to integrated measures like changing the water source and ecological replenishment, groundwater levels in northern China have generally gone up, and many rivers and lakes have come back to life. The water transfer project from the south to the north in China remains one of the most talked about initiatives in the country. And not just because of its benefits, but also because of the problems associated with it. For example, the project involved relocating more than 330,000 people, which sparked a public outcry in Hubei province, where the project required the creation of new reservoirs. Locals weren't just relocated, some claimed they were even forced to sign relocation agreements. Locals are protesting the forced relocation because they already had to leave their homes during the reservoir construction. Local authorities banned the protests, which has led to rising tensions with the population who are already struggling with the relocation. People in the villages along the eastern route of the project in Shandong province complained about water pollution coming from the Yangtze River, which led to fish dying in local bodies of water. However, after a series of studies, it was found that the water diversion actually improved the aquatic environment of the lakes. Another major problem is the draining of rivers such as the Han to support the central route. This poses a risk to ecosystems and messes up water supply to southern areas like Sichuan and Hubei. The project is also causing conflicts between provinces. Southern regions like Sichuan and Hubei are strongly opposed to diverting water to the northern areas, fearing it will lead to water shortages and droughts in those regions, as well as make it harder to develop hydropower. Unlike them, western provinces like Gansu and Qinghai actively support the project, seeing it as essential for socio-economic development, as it'll provide water supply for agriculture and industry. These regions have high water needs, and the South to North Water Diversion Project is seen as a key solution for regional economic growth.